A great movie should suck you in. Nope does that literally.
You'll leave here different.
This character knows something that we don't, and he promises the audience
spectacle.
And we get one. We cut to 15 agonizing seconds in the belly of the beast, literally sucked in by the spectacle. And the man who put those shots together is Nicholas Monsour. Nicholas has edited Nope, Us, Keanu, and Peele. And we talked to him about streamlining in the edit.
The first edit I sent him was 4 hours long. There was already kind of 2 versions running the whole time.
How much the script dictates his cuts.
I try and pretend I don't know anything about this movie. What's the short film I can make out of this material?
And hidden details in Nope that you might have missed.
He held on to it so much was this whole thing about the exploitation of child actors.
That's a very nuanced layer.
Nick, thanks so much for being on the show. This is the editing podcast. So what are we going to do first? We're going to talk about some editing. So we have the scene. It's the first scare of the movie where there's something happening in the barn. And so we'd love to give it to you and have you break it down for us from an editing perspective.
The first thing I'll say about before we even started is we kind of had to make sure that this first scare in the movie comes when you're really prepared for it and in a place that it feels like, I think I'm ready from having watched enough movies for something to happen here. And when it cuts to night, when you're out there in a spooky ranch in Santa Clarita and there's wind and crickets and they're separated, which is always a little scary in anything horror-like. So anyway, there's all these little things that I think we know people are familiar with that set you up.
There's like common / kind of cliche horror language.
Yeah, you are on the edge of your seat, but you're also like kind of aware that this is a Jordan Peele movie, and from the movie you've been watching up to that point, that it's not going to be what I think it is. So this first shot was something we added in the edit that wasn't there, which was, what's a cue we can give you to start your hairs standing up on your arm and to lean in a little bit, which is just the silence. We've been with them talking. There's been a lot of energy. So at this point, we're just pull it all out. That's a brilliant Jordan choice and Hoyte choice to keep things in our character's perspective, really. So even though we see something he doesn't, he's instantly aware of it. And then we're really with his vision as he looks at it.
So a lot of perspective editing in this.
Definitely. And, there's ways to do horror where you aren't in a kind of POV. And we go in and out of it. But there is this dominant logic in the movie that we only get to see what these characters get to see. And when we get to see something else, it's kind of jarring and shocking. You give power to certain shots by establishing certain rules and then breaking them. We haven't done some of these kinds of shots in this film yet, so it's another cue that there's something about to happen. We're on a steady cam, cranes, tripods, dollies, these little hints that I think are all setting you up. The lack of music is also another cue.
I feel something's wrong.
Jordan knew this was the third Jordan Peele movie. He knew that people were showing up waiting for a scene like this in a way. So he knows what he's doing. So that's a great moment when we really know something is wrong.
What about the timing of that? Did you have to experiment to get that timing right?
Yeah, there's an intuitive part to it. And then there's there's a rule of how you should do it that you got to learn. And most of the time, I think the intuitive thing has to take over. And I only feel confident about that by watching tons and tons and tons of things that you think are pulling off things that you're interested in also being able to pull off. We're cutting from his face to his back. You always know that you're wait, no, I wanted to see what was behind him. Don't take that away from me. So you look for the moment that makes you feel uncomfortable. This is basic, don't mess up the feeling of being with him and really focused, and the dribble of information you're getting of dark shapes. This kind of bio horror almost, in a way of, I don't think that's how something's supposed to move. I don't understand how it moves that way. So it's calming performance of Daniel for the moment that really satisfies the intuitive thing when I know how I'm reacting, and then looking at his facial expressions and how he moves and what he does. What's he doing with his phone? Is he trying to film it?
There's like an interesting balance where it's like, I want to know how OJ is reacting, but I want to know it from also to an extent, like my perspective, I want to know what's now hunting him. And so you're trying to get that balance right of just like complementing both of those questions that I, the audience, raised, but then an imbalance makes the other element just not as impactful.
This shot is the epitome of that, where this is pretty close to one of the earlier edits where it lets it go the whole time and lets you wait for it. Because I could tell that was sort of how it was designed from knowing Jordan and the rack to the phone. We've been waiting for something to happen on this shot. And I think what he preferred with this one was you figure it out. You notice that there's something that isn't supposed to be there rather than an action on screen being that punctuation.
Even for me, what's now interesting, especially when you relay the fact that a lot of the scenes told through OJ's perspective. And in that brief moment where we have that bit of information before him, that now freaks us out a little bit more as well. You had the opportunity to cut away, but you held on to that one shot with the other kid alien coming out of the pole. Right. You chose to hold on to that for such a long time and then revealing onto that one. Well, yeah, it's effective. I'm saying, great editing.
Well, no, and we got it to a point we thought was effective, and then we showed it to a couple hundred people, and it worked. And then the comedy of the end of the scene is that shift from being loaded up with all that tension and then deflating it with something comedic. And that specifically comes from a very literate audience, knowing that, like, usually in a moment like this in a horror movie, the character would do something stupid where you would be like, why would you do that? No, you dropped your phone. Oh, you now you're in more trouble. And OJ does exactly the right thing, which is just one clean punch.
It makes us trust the movie a lot more that he's not doing stupid things. It's like, yeah, that is a smart thing to do. It makes me trust the movie. One of my favorite things about that movie was the night scenes. They shot them during the day. They had two cameras next to each other, and one of them was an infrared camera. And they used that data to then turn the day footage into night. What was it like working with that method?
You learn like what your imagination is sort of capable of, and what the people you work with, how they're used to thinking about things. So some people had a hard time, but for a long time we were watching the movie with really strange looking nighttime stuff because they did a very rough combination of the two as quick as they could at the lab. You would cut from a night for night shot where he's wearing a blue outfit and looks like Daniel Kaluuya to a shot where his skin is inverted. You're seeing freckles from infrared. You had to forgive those kinds of bumps in the edit in order to judge them. We did do some temp color to smooth some of that when it was really distracting. But there's a lot of imagination involved, which it's part of what I like about being able to work with film as the primary medium, cutting digitally, but it does give you hints of how much imagination was required when cutting purely on film without any digital intermediate and having to imagine so much more and pre-imagine so much more in order to do each edit. It felt right for this project. Jordan made a really smart choice because it's part of the subject matter of the movie is how these things are made and the kind of references to Hollywood history. So it made sense that we also had to kind of understand a little bit about older processes that we're still using. You'll hear over and over again from anyone who works with Jordan Peele that the way he gives notes is incredibly generous to his collaborators' own set of knowledge and experience. And he doesn't tell you the frame to cut or the order of the shots. He'll say, what I want to feel from the sequence is this.
Was there an instance like that where it was just like, I know your strengths, but here's what I want for this scene?
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes it's spoken, sometimes it's sort of evident to me in the script and the footage, and then later we talk about it. But I mean, a scene like the early on in the movie, OJ is he's the only representative on this commercial shoot from Haywood Hollywood Horses, and his dad used to do it, and he's not very good at public speaking or interacting with people, and it's a somewhat scary, loaded, strange environment, which commercial sets or film sets can be. They shot it from a lot of angles. One angle they were very deliberate about was OJ's POV around seeing the cinematographer looking at him, seeing people kind of get too close to the horse, seeing his sister run in late and do her spiel. You could tell from the moment I saw how deliberate they were on that POV footage. And then the descriptions in the script of OJ's awkwardness or his sort of stuttering responses that like that's a feeling I need to keep through this. So I think that was very clear. And then what I'm trying to do is make sure I'm not losing the other so I'm doing an edit where you're really tracking that, and I'm like, okay, at this moment, what would OJ turn his head to? At this moment, what would his reaction to that line be? So I'll be working on a scene. I'm like, well, I know that right after this, the movie pauses and the next scene is a long, slow scene where we're really leaning into the characters. So I don't want this one to feel that way because that will put too much pressure on the next one. But I don't have the next one yet. So I'm going to wait to show him this cut until I have that one. And I'll tell him and he'll be like, yeah, great, fine. And then it's when I have a thing sort of fleshed out that I can show him so that he can see why I made the choices I did.
One of the first experiences running from the alien, that was quite an intense action sequence. It was high energy, very tense, very exciting. But then the scene immediately afterwards was kind of essentially like one long take. Were those the types of things that you having to keep in mind between, let's just say you didn't have that long take shot?
The end version is not terribly different than where we started, but the subtle ways it is different only came through, I would do one where I was like, this can't be longer than this. Really, I don't think, if we want it to be under 3 hours or whatever. But then I'd send that to him and he'd say, great, we know we have that. Can I see the one where we really go into it? And be like, okay. So then we do lots of versions that are much longer, much more indulgent. And then you'd watch that whole first act and be like, okay, well, that is insane. We can't take that long. That's a very good example of that. Another one I think of is the movie just sort of got started. They've met each other at the commercial set. They're driving back home. This is the part in the movie where they're driving back home and you would go to the ranch and you would have the scene where they talk to each other and bond about dad. But he literally takes a left turn and goes to Jupiter's Claim. And there's a whole other weird deviation that the movie takes. And I think everybody feels some amount of this is weird, that like the movie kind of just paused for a second and went here. So it must be about something. And I think it's part of what gives the Gordy and Jupe storyline. The audience knows that it's working on this deeper thematic layer because he put it in a moment when you really shouldn't in a way. So that became a challenge where, you know, we go in and there's all this amazing performance of Kiki and Daniel reacting to Steven. And there's only so long we get to do this deviation where you're in that sweet spot of pointing out to the audience that this is going to come back. This is going to be thematically important, but it isn't the main storyline. And if you spend too long with Steven or he becomes too primary a character, it doesn't pay off later.
What did the theme of the movie mean to you?
To criticize popular culture, popular American culture's obsession with spectacular images of violence and exploitation in particular, to criticize that, but then also make a spectacle film that's also criticizing it.
During that scene, I think the one where Stephen Yeun's character is showing them all the memorabilia of Gordy, where he's talking about the traumatic experience that he had, but through the perspective of the SNL sketch. He's putting a smile on his face, and I'm hearing the music swell up. And then it cuts to the actual experience.
Crushing it. He is a force of nature. He is killing on that stage.
And then we hold on to that shot for a little bit too long. And then it cuts back to him. He drops his arms. He kind of sighs for a little bit. And then he puts a smile back on. For me, that was a really, really powerful moment. Again, especially, I think it is, in the sense, my interpretation of that was how people love to hear about people's traumatic experiences. People love to hear those stories. And I think in a lot of cases, like those people who have to tell those stories have to put a smile on their face. But then as they do get the emotional flashback. So even for you, like, what was the experiences like to try to make that clear?
The length of a shot I always think of as a kind of weight. You know, if you're reading a book and suddenly this character gets a whole chapter, you know, like that has become a more dominant theme in that book now. You often are looking at this and the director isn't. You can literally see a kind of readout of what weight are you giving that character, this thing that is mostly about this theme in the movie. I don't know if in that level we need the flashback to his face just within that scene. In some ways, there's a power to not cutting and just not knowing what's going on in his head. But then you're looking at it within the bigger film and you're thinking, okay, well, we've teased this Gordy thing up front. We haven't seen whose POV we're in the opening shots. This is another piece of that puzzle that comes 25 minutes later or something, 20 minutes later. So I think it's an invitation to remember that it's another, pearl on that thread, that if you don't put anything there for too long, when it comes back, maybe makes the audience feel like they're not part of it or with it. So that was something we're tracking, is how long has it been since we've mentioned that? And is this the time? Are we telling that bigger story that takes the whole movie to tell in the right order? And then the third layer, I guess, is like the themes of it and, and the character psychology, where we know, like with trauma, and he's telling this traumatic incident, the shoe is this kind of perfect metaphor in a way for disassociation. When we do see the attack, we realize he's listening to somebody being murdered in the other room, and as a child just finds some kind of strange comfort in this bizarre physical phenomenon of a shoe that happened to be standing straight up on its in a somewhat impossible way. He's not looking at it, and he's not talking about the real exact thing. It's this focus on something else. So the vulnerability it gives that character in that moment, and also we're going into the mind of a character, which we only in that movie do with OJ and M. When there's flashes to things they remember, and the editing language becomes sort of their internal POV. So it elevates Steven suddenly to this level of importance. So there's all those levels that I hope it was working on. And we tried many different versions. That's the kind of thing where Jordan will say, what if we did this? And there were maybe 5 ideas. It's like, what if we filmed the SNL thing? What if we showed Gordy? What if we showed there's different ideas, and I mock them up as quickly as I can. We test drive them. And then the end version is a polished version of the thing we thought was most effective,
We talked a lot about specific scenes, about how we've, you start from your first cut and you get to the final version. But I bet you there's a lot that goes into the entire film. You also talked about scenes on how this scene is super fast, and then we want the following scene to be slow, and we want to create that contrast, and we want to think about the film as the entire thing, not just as a scene by scene basis. Was there anything that was different from the script that you found in the overall edit that made it better?
There's a sort of introduction to OJ as a character waking up really early and working on the ranch. Him feeding all of the horses, him clearing out every stall. The flashes of Gordy at the very beginning in the quote were not there for a long time, and that really emerged once we put the thing together in something that was closer to the sort of logical order, the chronological order, and then watched it enough times to think about what the impact was of when we hit the explanation of Gordy. We wanted to be thinking about that more from the beginning, and that the way that thinking about those images without knowing what they are, but seeing lights and a stage and this animal, how that then changed what you watched in between was feeling truer to what the script was trying to do, even though it wasn't in the script. The first edit I sent him of the whole or that we sat and watched of the whole thing was 4 hours long.
Dang.
Oh, wow.
And that is not because I was letting everything play. That's cutting at a reasonable pace, but just that many more scenes and things that they wrote and shot. I sent that to him, but I had also sent him tighter versions of all of it. So there was already kind of 2 versions running the whole time. One is like, I think we're going to end up here. And then here's me trying to do a version of everything you shot so you can at least see it put together and judge it. And then where we ended was some weird combination of those 2, So the flashes of Gordy, I think, really helped tell the audience to not get too comfortable.
It set the tone really nicely. Yeah.
And that's something I've noticed is a calling card of anything anyone calls horror. I mean, I think of the opening credits of The Shining, where if you just put nice music on that, it's not a horror movie. It's a beautiful shot of them driving up a beautiful landscape. I mean, the wide angle is a little extreme and makes you feel a little weird, but I still think there's these big cues dropped early that are from the author, from the director telling you, no. What you see, there's more going on than what you're seeing. There's something lurking here. There's something subliminal. There's something inside the characters in the psychology It's right behind the surface, but it's there. And that's what the music can tell you. And that's what editing can tell you too sometimes, is that there's something else going on besides what's photographed. And the cuts to black in between was another, I think, hallmark that became clear when it worked in a couple places that Jordan had specified. Is something that I remembered and would use other places, because the black and abrupt cuts also help you know that there is a plan and there's an intentionality between like when we're letting you see something and when we're not. And if it's all slow and languorous, you can lose that trust sometimes, I think.
Are there any other ways that you can tell the audience, hey, there's something else going on with editing other than that?
Definitely. I mean, it's some weird dance with the material you have. When I get the footage, I don't read the script notes even at first. I just watch it that day. I'll have an hour to 3 hours of stuff that they filmed, and I'll sit and watch it, and I try and pretend I don't know anything about this movie. I haven't been talking about it. I don't know the script. I do, obviously, and that's all there. But what's the short film I can make out of this material? There's some ways in which you realize that the way you're cutting or the way you're finishing with music and sound, or treatment of the image can be jarring. Like the classic thing I always think of is like a slow move on a crane almost always makes you want to hear music. If you don't have music on it, you notice. These things change over time, but I think it's still true that over years and years of watching TV and movies, that's just how it is. And so when it's not that way, it's weird. Especially if it's a person sitting there and they're, telling them, and there's just slowly moving in on them. It's almost like the dolly has like a cello bow on it, and you just expect this. It just feels, it goes along with the motion. It's telling you to lean in and invest in this character or something.
Sounds like you are trying to take film rules that already exist and you're sort of subverting them. And that's what creates that tension.
That's the general rule. Yeah, I think you have to try and be aware of what the audience that you're talking to will be expecting and how much you want to go along with that or not. And if you're not, what you want the audience to get from that choice. Is it beginning to end? Is the whole thing like that? Or are you using it in specific places? It's true with horror and comedy that they are founded on like the moments of shock or surprise of subverting social norms and taboos and breaking those rules. And so when you're filming it and you're watching a movie, if you're breaking the filmmaking rules, I think you can give something a horrific feeling or a suspense or a comedic effect, and often all at once. Horror movies are funny to me. I laugh through most of them. Like I piss a lot of my friends off because like we'll be watching like a David Lynch movie, which I love, and I love like Lost Highway. I laugh the entire time. Like, and part of it is like laughing at the audacity to do something that unusual, and through like the pleasure that gives me to see somebody be like, I'm gonna make a movie and I'm gonna do this. Like it's so funny to me and such a great. It's like a joyful thing, and when I feel like I'm in on that choice, I think, and then it can also be a nervous laughter sometime. Where and those are very related, that kind of tension you get in a thriller. There are techniques that are very experimental that in a drama you would be very jarred by. Like I think of like, absurdist comedies like Jacques Tati or Marx Brothers or something, where the sounds in the movie don't make any sense with what you're seeing. And horror too has some of the most experimental techniques used in it, especially in music and sound.
By knowing what are common tropes gives you perfect ammunition to break them.
I do like working with Jordan because there's times I'll try something when no one's around and I'll think like, am I allowed to do this? And I'll go grab somebody and be like, is this okay? Like, like some of the music choices. It made me laugh a lot, and I'm always amazed when they make it the whole way.
Is there an example of that?
It's another way that we dialogue about what's going on in a scene without breaking it down intellectually. Is just throwing music onto things, saying like, oh, I don't like that. I kind of like that one more. And I'll be like, oh, that's interesting that he likes that track more. That helps me understand the vibe a little bit, even if we don't end up using it. On the commercial set, there's the background music playing in the set is a French pop record Jodie Foster made when she was 12. I think, called Life is Cool, which is such a bizarre choice. And I also knew it would be nearly impossible to license because I don't think they told him no so many times. And he just kept being like, please, like, keep trying, like, try emailing this person or that, you know. I realized why he held on to it so much was this whole thing about child actors and potential trauma as a kid, as a child actor, and how that plays out, and the exploitation of child actors.
That's a very nuanced layer.
He was like, bro, that is so dope. We have to make that happen.
That's what I mean by the devil's in the details. So, like,
Yeah.
that's really it really helps make that film very detailed. So it's a really, really nice touch. So with the theme of spectacle or like spectacular images that we're like so desperate to see, like that is the theme of the movie. When were you in editing trying to imply and probably make the statement that this is the theme of that movie?
That was so woven in to the performance and the script and the story that actually I think we were taking the edge off that a bit. Like the last third of the movie, when they've assembled their team of sort of ragtag outcasts and, you know, people with very different reasons for wanting to try and capture an image of this thing and what it represents to them. It was tricky to not make it feel like a morality tale or like we're judging these characters, where when they try and things don't go well and people die and get injured and the house gets destroyed, it isn't some kind of punishment that the film is taking out on these characters for trying. So it's an open question if those characters got what they wanted or not.
Yeah, that's true.
It basically meant not making the ending feel punishing to them and not making them make too many choices that you're going, oh, come on, like, don't do that. And then you're judging them for maybe going too far and passing the point of any credulity. So it was really woven in. And then it was a matter of like not feeling like we were telling the audience too much of what to make of it. I think was more of the challenge in the edit was keeping Jordan's level of how much he wants you to be able to think about what happened to those characters and why they did what they did.